morning, America. If you are a first-time ISOJer, you may find a little strange this way to open a conference, but this is my Hollywood-inspired, thanks Robin Williams, salutation that I have been using to open my classes at the Moody College of Communication for almost 2 decades. But with ISOJ, I had to upgrade my salutation, and now it's good morning, the world. Welcome to the 22nd International Symposium on Online Journalism, a premier global conference on the evolution of the news industry into the digital era. Thank you very much to our 2 major sponsors, Knight Foundation and Google News Initiative. We are grateful for their support and inspiration. Get ready for a week of great presentations, exciting cases and topics, lessons on best practices from around the United States and around the world. We will be discussing the most pressing issues in online journalism today. It's a big conference. A week ago, we had already broken the record of people registered, surpassing 5,000 ISOJers from dozens of countries. We are breaking also the number of speakers, 87, a diverse and impressive lineup of 87 speakers, 5 keynote sessions, 5 workshops, 10 panels, and 2 parties. Yes, we are doing our part to make sure that we work hard this week, but we also party hard and socialize, meet old friends and colleagues, and make new friends. Yes, we are online only, but want to keep some of the traditions of the in-person conferences in Austin. The welcome party today will be offered by the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowships at Stanford University. And on Friday, the farewell party will be hosted by our beloved college at the University of Texas at Austin, the Moody College of Communication. I want to invite my partner for many years of ISOJ, Amy Schmitz Weiss, who is the ISOJ's research chair, to say a few words before the Moody College Dean, J. Bernhardt, who will be welcoming you all on behalf of the University of Texas at Austin. So Amy, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and for this spectacular conference this week. Our research component for ISOJ will not disappoint this year. This year, we have a stellar group of 6 scholars who are eager to share their work with you. Our first research panel will be on Tuesday, exploring the evolution in online journalism today, from the impact of algorithms on the journalism practice to key factors in misinformation and zombie news content. On Friday, we will have our second research panel focusing on new pathways to understanding news audiences. We have scholars who will be taking a look at the evolution of Latinx media and also looking at how engagement practices are evolving in our current news ecosystem. We hope you'll join us for this great research panels that we have this week. Do check out the articles featured in this conference in our ISOJ journal, which can be found on the website isoj.org/research. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dean Bernhardt.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're watching us right now. On behalf of the University of Texas at Austin, the Moody College of Communication, and our fantastic School of Journalism and Media, I'm honored and delighted to welcome you to the 22nd Annual International Symposium on Online Journalism. It's been 22 years since Professor Rosental Alves hosted the first ISOJ in April of 1999. And by coincidence, that year was the 100th anniversary of the first academic program focused on communication at UT Austin, which many years later became what we now call the Moody College of Communication, one of the largest and most respected colleges of communication in the world. Professor Alves' original idea was for ISOJ to bridge the gap between the news industry, which in 1999 was beginning to be transformed by the digital revolution, and with academia, where scholars were just beginning to explore the internet and think about how it might just change reporting and journalism. Since 1999, ISOJ has been that essential bridge, linking together its mix of groundbreaking journalists, media executives, teachers, and scholars from all over the world. And like it was for Rosental and ISOJ, the practice of building bridges is very important to us here at Moody College. A beautiful pedestrian bridge uniting our complex of buildings became a landmark on the UT Austin campus back in 2016. And since then, Moody Bridge has been an important symbol for our college, linking together our 5 schools and departments, 7 majors, 14 graduate programs, 11 centers and institutes, and our many news and media outlets and platforms. And as we all know, our world today faces a number of monumental challenges. Problems, politics, and platforms pull us further apart, in countless ways. We are being pulled apart. And our best hope for solving these challenges is by building bridges that are grounded in the scholarship, the science, and the practice of communication and journalism. For more than 2 decades, ISOJ and the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas has been building bridges on a global scale. And I'm pleased that you have joined us again this year to continue that important journey. I hope you enjoy this year's innovative program and that your work and your ideas add to our collective bridge toward facts, science, truth, and justice. And don't forget to join us for the virtual farewell party at the end of ISOJ on Friday, hosted by Moody College. Thank you all so much. Have a great conference.
Thank you very, very much, Dean Bernhardt. This is a great moment for us because, it's a lot of preparation and excitement. So like I used to say when the conference is here on campus, let's rock and roll. So I'm calling my colleague, Mallory Tenori, who has been a force behind all the organization of this event, who will host from now on and call the first keynote session. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Rosental, and welcome everyone. Thank you for bearing with us as we troubleshooted some technical issues. We apologize for the delay. So hopefully all technical issues are now out of the way for the rest of the week. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce our first session of ISOJ 2021, a keynote conversation with A.G. Sulzberger, chairman and publisher of the New York Times. The conversation will be moderated by Alberto Ibargüen, president and CEO of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. We are so honored that you're both here with us today to kick off ISOJ. And now I'd like to turn the conversation over to Alberto, who will introduce AG.
Thank you very much, Mallory. Thank you for inviting us, and thank you, Rosental, and congratulations on your 22nd annual symposium. It's really quite a remarkable achievement these days of a flash in the pan. You are not, and we're grateful for it. AG, thank you for joining us. I had about a 10-minute introduction lauding you and telling all the wonderful things. We just don't have time.
Let's skip straight to the tough questions then.
Anybody who wants to know about them, go read the New York Times, they'll tell you. You are the leader of one of, if not the most consequential news organization in the world. I want to make sure that we do justice to the range of things that we had thought to talk about: trust in media, diversity and inclusion, both as it relates to trust and as it reflects society, business sustainability that allows independence in news organizations, and the prospects for national versus local news in the United States, and the protection of journalism, protection of journalists. Violence and harassment of journalists in this country is escalating, and of course is going unabated in much of the rest of the world. Let's start with the business. You famously first really came to public light when a report that you chaired about the future of the New York Times came to light. And it seems to many of us from outside that you have managed to set on a course to take advantage of the gift of the technology. I'm borrowing from Jeff Bezos's phrase. The technology is a gift to organizations like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, that have a news product that is national and international. And of course, the World Wide Web is called that for a reason. Tell us how this year was. I know it was a pretty good year. And what are your business considerations? Things on the top of mind at this point for the business success of the enterprise that allows you to support independent journalism.
Yeah, great. Let me take a stab at it and then jump in if I'm going on too much. First, I just want to thank everyone for having us here today. Your question about how journalism adapts to the technological shifts of the age has obviously been something that's been deeply on my mind. And I think some of the hiccups this morning are a reminder that journalists and technology are actually a sort of a perilous mix. And so thanks to the patience, for everyone who's been waiting for us to hop on. So look, I mean, I think, God, it's almost 8 years ago when I worked on the report that you just mentioned. And I think one of the things that I've had to process, both in that period of time, but also since then, is just that change is emerging as a constant that news organizations are going to have to learn to live with. And that's, technological change and how we can report and tell and distribute our journalism, audience behavior changes that are really significant and can't be ignored, and then business model changes. And, I think, as you said, as a business, it was a good year this year, in part because it was a really consequential news year, and people needed sources of information they could trust. I mean, I think if there's one shift in the broader landscape that I have really been encouraged to see over the last couple of years, it's as the sort of the broader internet and social media continues to get, more overrun with, lies and conspiracy theory and scorched earth political rhetoric and hot takes. I really do feel like we're seeing a new generation looking, once again for sources of news they can trust. And I think, for all the folks logging into this conversation around the world who work at, legacy news organizations or digital news organizations that are coming up, with the traditional values of independent journalism, I think that that's an opportunity. And I think one of the biggest things we're going to have to do is continue to tell the story about how what we do is different from what you find on social media or on the rest of the internet. So that's the new challenge I'm spending the most time worrying over.
So let me ask you: what about you've got, if I have my notes correct, you've got about 7.5 million total subscribers. Not a whole lot of people are in that category. What is it about what you're doing that is unique to the Times, and what is it that the rest of us could learn from in terms of the way you're managing the business?
Yeah, I'll say one thing, which may or may not be helpful, which is I'm often asked by other, industry leaders just about, what the sort of secret of a successful subscription model is, as if it's, some sort of technical thing around, the pay flow or, the architecture of the offer page or how we restrict, and allow access to content. The key to a successful subscription business, or actually any reader-funded journalistic operation, is good journalism. And I just really, really believe that. And, we had a really long, hard stretch where we gutted much of the company in order to protect that core investment in in journalism, believing with every fiber of our being that that would be the path out of it ultimately, even if we couldn't quite see, at that moment exactly what that path would look like. So I do think, like, if there's one piece of advice I have, it's invest deeply in the journalism. And I'm aware that there's a cycle there, that it's harder to do that once the business has started to go south. Then beyond that, I liken the journey we've been on. I had this moment right after I wrote the innovation report, and where, we were trying to figure out how to navigate this really changed digital environment. And I visited our printing plant for the first time in years in Alberta. I'm sure you've spent a lot of time in printing plants. And the thing that really struck me about it was the degree of precision that had been dialed in over the course of a century. And the way I always think about it is, like, there's this, the humidity index in the printing plant has to be within like 0.4%. And if you go too far on one side, the paper jams up. If it's too humid, it jams up in the presses. And if it's too dry, it snaps on the presses. And I do feel like part of what we're doing is we're building in digital that same sort of machine that we've always had in print. And we just have to appreciate that in print, we had 100 years to refine those systems and processes and technologies. And, we're a decade into this transition. So it's not to say there aren't best practices that we need to be learning from. But I do think all of that is downstream of the quality of the work itself.
It always struck me whenever I'd look into pre-press or go into a press room or ride a truck with delivery, that there was not just there was that precision in so much of the manufacturing of the operation, but there was so much that was about collaboration, that was about marrying the operations with the business, with the journalism. And I find the online operations that are looking most successful, and I'm thinking about things like Texas Tribune, where they or Voice of San Diego, just to name two examples that will now upset 35 others that are doing the same thing. But they are also taking a hard look at putting out the best journalism, doing serious business to support that journalism so it can be independent, and then also paying attention to the smart application of technology so that they are able to keep up with the audience. What's your audience telling you about how they want their news delivered?
Yeah. Can I say I'm going to say one more thing that you said, because you invoked the 7.5 million subscribers. Mm-hmm. I think we need to tell ourselves as an industry that those numbers that once seemed astronomically large, are totally reasonable. I mean, I am constantly struck by how many Americans subscribed to newspapers at the peak of print, which I think was the peak of print was in the 70s or 80s. I think it was something like 60 million Americans, and most subscribed to 2 newspapers in addition to a bunch of magazines. Yeah. So I do think that, there's something about the digital age. We're building this market back up. And I think all of us should collectively believe that there's, that there is and will continue to be demand and hopefully increasing demand for great journalism. I mean, the times we live in are just so consequential, and the role that organizations like ours can play is significant. So to me, that's an optimistic thought. And we've, as an industry, we've spent so much time on the defensive. I think it's important to remind ourselves of that. So sorry, your question just then was?
Well, I was asking that the intelligent application of technology, which to me means figuring out how to get your newspaper to the customer, however the customer wants it. Yeah. What are your customers telling you they want? How do they want it?
Well, I'll say 2 things. I mean, one, it's great products great like product thinking really starts with the customer and then, optimizes from there. And I actually think that great journalism often inverts that. I do think that you need some vision in journalism of not just what do people, what are the indicators that people want to know, but what do we think that people don't know they want to know? So I do think there is like a room for editorial judgment at the front end of the process. Now, that said, the increasing digital audience fluency that we're seeing in a lot of news organizations that really started in digital news organizations is really helpful. I have this story where I remember Nick Kristof, the columnist, saying to me that the wrong way to read the data about who's his articles, his columns, was to say that it was signaling, and this was in like 2016, 2017, that people wanted him to write more about Trump. And he said, look, that's the easy way to read the data. The more interesting way to read the data is to say, I know I had a great story and it didn't break through. What can I do next time to help that great, important story on a different topic break through? And he told me that, and 6 months later, he wrote this astonishing piece, multimedia piece. It was like the best sort of like detective story I had seen in multimedia journalism about a guy who it seems like there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that he was wrongfully convicted of murder in California. And it was just this beautiful, compelling multimedia piece. And I sent him a note, or I think I called him to congratulate him on it and to say how moved I was by it. And he said to me, I bet you didn't notice that I wrote the exact same piece 12 months ago. And I said, I did not notice. I have no memory of that piece. And he said, yeah, no one read it. And I thought it was such an important story. And it really gnawed at me that no one read it. And so to the collaboration word you used, I sat down with a bunch of really talented people, to help think about how I could bring this story to life in a way that grips our readers as much as it gripped me. And I told it, and millions of people ended up reading that story, and it ended up having a huge, huge impact in California on the case. So to me, I think that's like the fun, exciting stuff about this moment, which is we have so many more tools and so much more powerful tools to reach readers, but also to tell stories in the way that they want to be told. I'm struck occasionally just hearing voices on our podcasts that even the finest writers couldn't bring a story alive, the way that hearing the crack in someone's voice as they tell a personal story does.
Well, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic lesson, too, that somebody of the caliber of writer, reporter, columnist that Kristof has enough introspection, enough humility in his approach to the reader that when it didn't work one way, he looks internally, not saying they should have read it or the editor should have played it in a different way, but what can I do? I think that shows the mark of a really great craftsman. We have so many things to cover in so little time because of the delay in getting started, but I wanted to ask you in relation, I think you and I agree that trust in media is low. I think every poll that we've done with Gallup, with Pew, with almost anyone shows us that the trust in media as an institution, often confused with evening television entertainment, not evening television news, but evening television opinion masquerading as news, is low. That trust is low. You've talked about the kind of quality product, the reliable news and information. Is that the way back to trust? Is it by doing the work, by doing great journalism that we get back to trust in media?
Boy, you're the type of person I'd be going to for advice on this one. You've probably thought more deeply about it than I have, but I don't think it's that simple. I think we have to understand that trust hasn't just declined, and of course the decline in trust is across institutions, but media has been particularly hard hit, and media is particularly dependent on trust. So, it should be front of mind, but it hasn't just declined. It's actually polarized, it's split and fractured in a really worrying way. For most of the last century, the gap in trust in media between Democrats and Republicans was about 5 percentage points. Today, last time I saw the data, which was probably a year and a half ago, it was 80 percentage point gap. And that should be worrying in a different way. I'd love to say that just putting our heads down and doing what we're doing is enough. But I think we need to be aware that there are systematic efforts happening in the United States, but also all over the world to discredit journalism and to discredit journalists. And I think we need to regard that as a campaign to characterize what journalism is. And meanwhile, the response at institutions like mine, and we're guilty of it too, is too often, to assume that people understand the conventions of journalism, the language of journalism, understand the difference between your news pages and your opinion pages, and to retreat to sort of easy lines like the story speaks for itself. I think the societal signal we're getting is that the story doesn't always speak for itself. And someone's in a need to tell the story of what is journalism, why does it matter, and what role can it play in your life? And I think as an industry, it is urgent for us to tell that story.
One of the things I like about that is, besides the fact that we agree and we're certainly directionally agreed, it reminds me of a comment your father made decades ago, that he was not so much worried about the newspaper as he was worried about the news, as he was worried about the necessary function that we play in news organizations of getting news into the minds of citizens so that the people can, in Jack Knight's words, determine their true interest. I suspect part of trust is also moving over to diversity and inclusion. I suppose part of trust too, I believe part of trust too, is in presenting things from a range of with a range, informed by a range of points of view. You've had perhaps more than your fair share of issues at the New York Times. What's your sense of our progress on diversity in news organizations and how we approach the neutral telling of news, while nevertheless acknowledging that your lived experience necessarily influences and in many ways adds to the understanding of the story?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. Let me start by saying, institutions all over the country are wrestling with, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think it's really especially imperative that news organizations do so in a real way, in a genuine, searching way, because our mission as news organizations is to help people understand the world, and the world is diverse and full of all sorts of experience and ideas. And if you want to capture those with nuance and sophistication and insight, if you want to fully capture the diversity of the world, I do think that it's essential to have a newsroom that approaches the diversity that you're covering. And I think when you do that, we've spent a lot of time the last 5 years working on diversity and inclusion, and not saying we still have a long way to go. We just put out a big report about where we're falling short and the actions that we're planning to take. But the progress we have made, I fully believe has made our journalism stronger. I'm not sure the New York Times of 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30 years ago, would have spotted, come up with the idea for the 1619 Project, which came from Nicole Hannah-Jones, one of our finest journalists, and ended up growing into a full magazine. And I think, responding to the Atlanta shootings, I was really struck, like the reporters on the ground, spoke Korean, spoke Chinese, and that allowed us to reach, members of the affected communities that we otherwise may have been very difficult for us to reach, and to talk to and understand with sophistication. So I do think that if you get this stuff right, your journalism just becomes stronger. And I think that's true on all sorts of axes, right? Those are two examples around race, but I think that's true with gender, with class.
Is it also true? Is it also true about technology? The Oscars were last night, and I read about them in the Times this morning, and I was struck by some of the various adaptations. It's axiomatic that a movie that is faithful to the book is a dull movie, as opposed to a movie where the movie maker gets a free hand and creates something for that medium. I think we in the newspaper business made a huge mistake in the 90s and early 2000s, thinking we were just going to put the newspaper on the web.
Yes.
At some point, this is a different medium, requiring a different kind of talent, skill, maybe a different kind of storytelling. Are you held back by the fact that you're still committed to print, and half the house is putting out a newspaper and half the house is putting out an incredibly important digital operation report?
I mean, I'd push back on the premise a little bit, because I actually think the newspaper itself is an exciting forum that reaches, a group of people that would otherwise struggle to engage with journalism. So I think of it that less as being held back by the newspaper than pushed forward by our ability to tell stories in all these different forms. Like, the Daily, our news podcast.
I want to make sure that everybody knows what we're talking. This is a newspaper for all of you digital people. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's still a great. I was watching you look around as I was wondering. So it's still a great way. If you care about serendipity and or you want to know all the news of the day, it really is a great way to read. But I think the exciting thing about the last few years has been, for the first time, I really feel like we're telling each story the best way that we can tell it. And podcasting, to me, is like, really confirms, what you suggested, which is we're telling stories in a really different way. We found a way to do it that's authentic to the times and authentic. So we're telling serious stories. We're telling serious stories with real depth and sophistication, but we're telling them in a way that also feels really authentic to the medium, which is, a much more intimate medium, a much more searching medium.
Yeah.
And it's a medium that's really good, among other things, at expressing uncertainty, right? And in the old construct of the pyramid structure of a newspaper article, uncertainty is actually a tricky thing to really land. In a podcast, it's great. So I think that once we started doing that, we actually started reaching a whole different group of readers who wouldn't think to pick up the newspaper, and honestly, probably wouldn't even think to download our app. So I do think that as we find all these different ways, we just did a big documentary on Britney Spears, and we chose the documentary form to tell that story. It had a huge impact, and again, I think it was because the form was right for the story.
My granddaughter was disappointed you didn't do the same on Taylor Swift, just so you have some reader feedback from an 11-year-old.
Well, if she's a Taylor Swift fan, she shouldn't be disappointed because the documentary was really about the hard road that Britney's had.
Let me ask you just about one other area that is very important to me, and I know it's very important to you, and that is the protection of journalists. Not very many of us get a chance to sit across from the person who calls in the White House, the person who calls the press the enemy of the people. I know you're concerned about this. It is happening in the United States with alarming frequency. It has been happening across the world. Organizations like CPJ, ICFJ, IAPA are busy all the time. Most recently, Roman Anin, the Russian investigative reporter who started iStories, Important Stories in Moscow, was arrested, detained a couple of times, his apartment, and it is continuing, and that's not even going to the murder of journalists, which is horrendous. What do we do? How do we effectively claim the protection of government, not the enmity of government, the protection of government, so that we are able to do our constitutional duty in the United States, and or so that we are able to tell the truth in so many other places that may not have First Amendment kind of legal protections as we do. What's your take on this? You have journalists everywhere, and so this is an issue for you at home and abroad.
Yeah, so I mean, we do have journalists everywhere, and it is something that we encounter. We just had all our journalists expelled from China. We've had to begin the process of relocating our journalists from Hong Kong. We've got folks in war zones, and we've got folks who, I've one reporter in Asia who was singled out at a political rally by an autocratic leader who literally pointed to her in the crowd and said in English, "This is the fake news," and I think may have said the phrase "enemy of the people." So yes, we do deal with it, but I have to say we don't deal with it anywhere near the level that the courageous journalists in those countries deal with it. And I was incredibly moved to see just on the chat, where everyone's calling in and dialing into this today, because I have so much admiration for the journalists, of these nations who are doing the hard work of challenging countries that have a more limited tradition of free press and free expression, but are still doing the brave work of ferreting out the truth and bringing to light truths that make powerful people uncomfortable. That work is much more dangerous there. And quite frankly, I think our country, the United States, owes all those brave journalists its support. This one of this country's greatest exports was the notion of a truly free press and the centrality of free expression and free speech. And for most of the last century, we have fiercely defended those principles abroad, and been a bulwark against attempts to crack down. That not always successfully and not everywhere, but it made a difference. And the former president's systematic delegitimization, of the press, and did the exact opposite. It didn't just signal a retreat; it offered a playbook to autocrats and strongmen around the world who were just waiting for an excuse to crack down on these pesky journalists asking their tough questions. And for anyone who cares about democracy and free peoples and injustice, that's going to make the world a weaker and more dangerous place. And I am deeply hopeful that the incoming administration or the current administration will with some urgency begin to send the signal that the United States cares about and will defend a free press.
I hope our listeners, our participants, support organizations like CPJ, Committee to Protect Journalists, the International Center for Journalists, and the Inter-American Press Association, among others, Reporters Sans Frontières, and so forth.
They do great work.
As they evolve in their support of journalists, because it's so often now not a government that's coming down on a journalist, but attempts to cancel a journalist who writes unpopular opinion and attempts to harass them and threaten their lives as well. AG, we are over time, but I'd ask you if you wanted. We didn't even get to talk about my favorite subject at Knight Foundation, which is supporting local news, where I think we have, as philanthropy, we have an opportunity to go down to the grassroots, and at that level begin to reestablish trust based on a reliable report. I wonder if you have some parting words. I know you've thought a lot about the importance of local news in the United States and other places. Yeah. If you have some last comments about that before we close.
I mean, first I'll just say that I think all of us are very admiring of your leadership and the work that you and the Knight Foundation have done to try to tackle those questions. I think I think a lot of the themes we've just talked about are connected, right? So the decline of trust, the rise of anti-press rhetoric and even anti-press crackdowns, and the collapse of local news, and of course the business model question. We need to accept that at a societal level, we need a healthy news ecosystem, journalistic ecosystem. And that journalistic ecosystem needs to be grounded on original reporting. And the vast majority of original reporting in this country and in every other country happens at the local level. And, I don't know what the answer is. You've spent more time searching on it, and I suspect you don't know what the answer is yet. But I do know that we need to be moving with urgency and resolve, and not just within our industry, but within our society, to say this is as pressing an issue as we are confronting today. Making sure that our fellow citizens continue to have access to independent reported journalism about their communities, and provides them the information they need for a strong and healthy democracy. So all I would say is, keep up the great work, and let's continue to build on the exciting success stories that you guys have been a part of, that we've been a part of. And let's do as much as an industry to share those lessons and to push them around the country and around the world.
Well, thank you very, very much. We are, as I said, well past time, so we need to stop here. But AG, it's been, as usual, excellent conversation, even inspiring, and I thank you for that on behalf of all the listeners. I can see in the chat there's material for at least another 2 hours worth of comment and conversation. I will volunteer to try to put something together. If people want some comments specifically answered, you can write to me at ibarguen, IBARGUEN @kf.org. And I would be happy, if you will be patient with me and waiting for a response. I will be happy to try to share some of those with AG and get you back at least a response. So thank you all very, very much for participating. AG, you've been terrific.
Thank you, Alberto. Great to see you.
And thank you, Rosental.
Thank you so much. I almost died here with with all the technical problems, but I am happy that it works. AG, thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So I apologize on behalf of everybody here for the for the late beginning and for the technical problems. I think, we are just starting ISOJ. We had a bumpy start, but we have almost 7,000 people from around the world who registered for ISOJ. We have lots of sessions coming up, and I am sure that we're gonna go straight, and the internet gods will be helping us. So in just a few minutes, we're gonna have the workshop with lessons from the Global South. So stay tuned, come back, and I promise it will work better, okay? Thank you very much. Bye-bye.